I know paddle tails are all the rage, right? And I get it. They're cool, they're fun to use, and anybody can use them. It doesn't take a rocket science. Cast it out, reel it in. What's great about this old school traditional method of fishing with jigs is you can still use your favorite paddle tail. But there's a lot of applications, a lot of different ways you can use these, and sometimes a little bit more technique involved. So we're gonna start going left to right here, and I've got our 4 different jigs in front of me. I'm gonna talk about each one, kind of break down how we like to use them, different techniques involved in fishing them, when, where, and how you go about using each one of these lures. Now, here on my left, I have a shrimp jig. This shrimp jig we make from 1/8 ounce, it's a small one in my hand here, all the way to 3/4 ounce. The shrimp jig is made to resemble exactly what it says, a shrimp, but it can be fished a lot of ways. And depending on how you work it, the current, the depth, the action you give the jig, fish may or may not think it's a shrimp, but they're still gonna eat it. You can slow roll this and sweep it on the bottom quite effectively. Again, depending on the depth, as we only go up to 3/4 ounce. But one of my favorite ways to fish a shrimp jig is with a little split tail, soft plastic, just like this. If I'm fishing docks, if I'm pitching under pilings, typically, you know, they're gonna be somewhere in the range of 5 to 6 feet deep. Depending on what the current is, most of the time I'm gonna grab something in the range of about a 1/2 ounce, maybe a 3/8 ounce. And if I want a little extra action, I'll put a little split tail on there, just like this, and it holds there really, really well. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna cast this up current and drift it with the current towards your pilings of your dock. The other thing you can do is get on the down current side and cast up current underneath your dock and roll it on the bottom nice and slow back towards the boat or towards you if you're wade fishing. I like to do a slow retrieve on the bottom with this jig and just very steady. That's one way I like to fish it. Another way I like to fish it is let it sink to the bottom, bounce it up. Let it sink to the bottom, bounce it up. Let it sink to the bottom and repeat that motion. When you're doing that, what you want to look for is your line on the surface of the water. When it's sinking, that line will be moving down. When that line has stopped moving, you've hit bottom. You want to make sure you're touching bottom every single time. The reason why you want to make sure you're touching bottom is as that jig pops up off the bottom, it'll give a little cloud of sand and it'll stir things up a little bit. So if there's bait fish around, if there's shrimp around, if you're fishing a grass flat, or if there's grass, you're coming up under a dock, any kind of structure in that area, you're gonna stir up the crustaceans, stir up the shrimp, stir up the bait, get things moving. Trout, redfish, snook, tarpon, they take note of those things, right? Life brings life. Now, we don't want to blow up an area. So we don't want to come through it and be tearing up the bottom and scaring fish. That's not what we're trying to do here. And so that's why it's important. You're fishing the right weight. If you're fishing something way too heavy and it's not moving in a natural way, so it's sinking very, very, very fast, right? Or it's creating a little bit too much commotion on the bottom, go to the next weight down. Okay, we want it to be able to get on bottom, but you don't necessarily need to stay on bottom unless you're fishing in a way or for a species of fish where you need to stay on bottom. So for example, if you're fishing a bridge and you're targeting snook and only snook, well, in that situation, you may need to stay on bottom, and especially if you're fishing at night, you're much less likely to spook what's in the area. But if it's daytime, especially in clear water, the risk of spooking the fish you're targeting is there and it's present. And so you want to make sure you're presenting that bait in as a natural way as possible. And that's why picking the correct weight for the depth and the current you're fishing is so important. So you want to be able to get to bottom, but you don't necessarily have to stay on bottom most of the time. Again, unless you're fishing a very specific way, especially for snook and deep water around bridges. That's where I would say there's like some exceptions to that rule. Where the shrimp jig really excels and where I really like it is especially in clean water. This white color profile mixed with this synthetic flash that we put around the straight nylon, it can look like a lot of different bait fish, natural prey that these predatory fish are keying in on. It can resemble a pilchard, a pinfish, even a croaker or a small mullet, a glass minnow, and obviously a shrimp as well. And so a simple sink, twitch, twitch, let that thing pop up and come back down, pop up and come back down. Very effective way to fish these. Another reason I really like the shrimp jig and several of the jigs that we're going to be talking about today is it has our troll right style jig head on there. And the reason I really like this jig head is for a couple reasons. Number one, it gives you a little bit of a slower fall rate than just a standard ball jig head that's going to sink and plummet straight down. Because this head is widened at the front, gives you a little bit of a slower fall rate. That's number one. Number two, this head is designed in a way to where if you get caught on a rock or structure on the bottom, there's not a whole lot of places for this head to get wedged in. And so I'm more successful getting this head unstuck from structure on the bottom than any other jig head I've ever used. This head is very, very, very good at getting unstuck and popping it off the bottom. So fishing inshore, we're talking, sand flats, grass flats, mangroves, docks, bridges, pilings, channels where you're coming off a flat and dropping down to a channel. All of these jigs really excel at fishing all of those inshore areas, but there's going to be different times and different applications where each one of them is maybe a little bit better than the other. And where the shrimp jig really takes off is in that clean water, especially in incoming tide. If you have white bait around, glass minnows, or shrimp around, this bait really, really does well. And I know I talked about fishing it with a little bit of a plastic on there, like a split tail we have here, but you do not need that. You can fish this as is out of the package and be very effective with it. Sometimes what I'm looking for when I'm deciding whether I want to add a soft plastic to it or not is what's the bait in the area like? If I need to beef up the profile of this bait a little bit, sure, put on a split tail, even put on a paddle tail, put on something that's going to give it a slightly larger profile, if that's going to help you better match the bait that's in the area that day. But if I have a lot of glass minnows around, man, this little 1/8 ounce is extremely effective because it looks exactly like a glass minnow, especially if you're going to cast and reel it in the top of the water column quickly and erratically. It looks like a fleeing glass minnow, a small fleeing bait fish. And if that's the prey that's around that day, if that's the bait that's around, you do not need anything else. This is the perfect profile, right? But maybe I have a bunch of finger mullet present. Well, if I have finger mullet present, as soon as I add a little tail to this 3/4 ounce, now I'm really getting close to matching the profile of those little 4, 5, 6 inch finger mullet that we get, a lot of in the fall. And so this is a fantastic option during the mullet run. One thing I like to do with all of these jigs, but especially the shrimp jig, because the white nylon that we use, you'll notice when you get it out in the sun, it has a slightly blue tint that it takes on. That's the fluorescence in this nylon. And what that fluorescence is doing is it's mimicking the reflective properties in the fluorescence that's in fish scales. And so as you're ripping this white jig through the water, you're going to get underwater, you're going to get a shine that you can't see inside here. It's only sunlight that gives it that unique purplish blue hue that you'll see on silver or scales of a lot of fish that we're catching. It's a common property of many different fish where they have this unique shine to it in the sun. And this nylon here is meant to mimic that to a degree. And so when we have these big schools of mullet around, I like to try to fish it with the mullet, if that makes sense. So I'll stay in the same water column. A lot of times the mullet will be on the surface. So I'll pop it like right through the school of mullet, maybe just under the school of mullet, on the outskirts of the schools of mullet, cast past the school and bring it through the school. Those are all great techniques when you have a lot of bait around. The other thing I like to do is just bounce this off the bottom. Just like we were talking about a second ago, if you're fishing through a dock and you're casting up current and bringing it back through the dock, you can do something very similar when you're fishing big pods of bait, just bouncing this off the bottom. And what that does is it mimics crustaceans like crab and shrimp that get stirred up as these big school of mullet. you know, as they move through a grass flat or a sandy flat or any area, what's happening is as they come through the area, all the life that's underneath that area starts jumping out of the grass, right? And the trout and the redfish and the snook and the jacks and the tarpon, they're around these school of mullet. And yeah, they're keying in on the mullet, but they're also looking for an easier prey, which is the little shrimp that is being scared out of the grass flats as these big pods of mullet are moving across an area. And so you take something like the shrimp jig and you just work it on the bottom, bounce it up, let it sink, bounce it up, let it sink, bounce it up, let it sink. Pause it. Sometimes just let it sit there on the bottom. Trout love that, especially if you have a little tail like this. That thing's gonna land, it's not laying flat. It's gonna land like this, and that tail's gonna come up and it's gonna be moving a little bit. Trout love picking up a jig off the bottom. You just can't be slack. You have to have tension in your line. You have to be able to feel your jig because the bite is subtle, their mouths are soft, but they love picking it up off the bottom. You just gotta be ready to set the hook quickly. But it's another very effective way to fish this jig. Has a lot of applications. One of my favorite ways to fish this is off the beach. Again, it's because we have a lot of whitebait on the beach most of the year down here. And anytime there's whitebait, this is a fantastic jig to throw because it's gonna give a lot of those reflective properties that your pilchard and any whitebait, sardine, for example, is giving you. So a lot of ways to fish this, available from 1/8 all the way to 3/4 ounce. If you're an inshore fisherman, have a few in your tackle box because there's days where other things aren't working and you're gonna tie one of these on and you're gonna get tight. You'll see they'll key in on that nylon hair, that flash, that small profile. Sometimes that's the key to getting the bite you're looking for. Check these out on our website, GulfstreamLuresUSA.com. We're gonna bounce over to our skimmer jigs. Now, our skimmer jigs are on that same troll right head, and these are just our traditional bucktail jigs that we've been tying since the 80s. We do these from 1/8 ounce all the way up to 1.5 ounce, which you see here. And man, there's just so many different ways you can fish them. We have white, pink, brown, yellow, chartreuse. Those are the 5 main colors that we stick with because they work. They just work really well. I'm sure we can get really fancy with all the colors, but this is a basic, simple jig. A lot of different applications for it, and we find that these colors just work everywhere. They work very effectively, they work everywhere, and there's no need to really make it more complicated than that. Most popular, white and yellow. In the bucktail, white and yellow are always go-tos, especially for surf fishermen and guys that use bucktail. And I want to add that all the bucktail we use at Gulfstream Lures is genuine bucktail. This is dyed bucktail. This stuff comes in stinky, and we dye it, we tie it, and it's not fun to work with. There are synthetic versions of bucktail on the market, and while it's cheaper, and the price point may be a little lower than genuine bucktail, it does not move through the water the same. Fish do not react to it the same. The action, the way the water hits it, it's just completely different. And so it looks nice. You'll definitely still catch fish on it, but I just really believe that real genuine bucktail is a premium item, a premium material, and it is better to fish with, in my opinion. Now, ways to fish it. Everything I said about the shrimp jig applies here. All those methods of bouncing it off the bottom, casting up current, matching the weight to the current, that's gonna apply for every single jig we're talking about. Where the skimmer jig really excels, I feel like, is surf fishing, fan casting, or covering a large distance. Also, if you are just doing a straight retrieve, and you're gonna move it really quickly through the water column, that bucktail is gonna give you more action than the nylon hair on the shrimp jig, for example, where this is moving very little through the water. The bucktail is gonna give you a lot more action, a much better flutter, and maybe a more natural approach, especially if you're working upper or mid part of the water column. What do they think it is? I don't know. Any kind of bait fish that's in the area, any kind of shrimp or crustacean, really depends on how you're working it. Here you can see we have one rigged up with a curly tail. This is a fantastic way to fish them from the beach. Cast it out with this curly tail, can do a straight retrieve, you can bounce it off the bottom. One of my favorite places to fish this curly tail is off a jetty. Jacks, redfish, tarpon. Shoot, I've even caught sheep's head with this method here. Putting that curly tail on, it's just gonna give this a little bit more action. I typically like to match the color of my curly tail to the bucktail, but you can also put something different on and get a little crazy with it. I like this green pattern we have here. Now this green's a really nice color for a little bit of dirty Mortanic water. And the white really excels in everything. I know we talked about using the shrimp jig in clean water. That's really where I prefer to use it, and it definitely does. But this white's gonna work in all different types of water. Where I find is the char really excels in dirty water because it stands out, it's gonna add contrast. That doesn't mean you can't catch fish with it in clean water, you absolutely can. I'm just saying my personal preferences and what I've seen. Char is gonna excel in dirty water, same thing with pink and brown. Yellow and white excel a little bit better in clean water. That's my personal experience. But that's not necessarily the rule. You may find it's slightly different for your area. I would say experiment with it, see what works best for you. One of my favorite ways to fish a skimmer jig, especially in the summertime when the snook are spawning, is I like to get a pack of frozen shrimp, which, you know, any Walmart or local bait and tackle shop or your local supermarket's gonna have. And what I'll do is I'll take our shrimp here, and I'm just gonna pull the head off, real simple. You can cut it, pull it, doesn't matter, it comes off real easy. And what we're gonna do is we're just gonna rig this shrimp tail onto the bucktail, okay? Now we're gonna go what we wanna do is put the hook through the back of the shrimp, so the bent part of the shrimp. So I'm gonna face it that direction. And I'm just gonna put it on about an inch. About an inch is how much shaft of the hook we have exposed here, okay? And we're just gonna slide that through the back of the shrimp and button that up there. And this is one of my favorite ways to bottom fish inlets, jetties, and passes on the east and west coast of Florida, St. Augustine, New Smyrna, Melbourne, Sebastian, Boynton Beach, Jupiter, Fort Myers, doesn't matter where you are, Naples, Pensacola. I have used this method throughout the state of Florida, and I've used it effectively. I've caught some very big snook over in the Captiva, Sanibel area, fishing with a bucktail, tip with the shrimp. You're gonna cast, you know, up current, drift it back with the current. Outgoing tide seems to be most effective for this method. And you're basically just holding bottom, rolling with the current there, and you're waiting for that thump, you're waiting for that bite, but it's a very effective way where you can fish it slowly and keep it in the strike zone for a very, very, very long time. It also works around bridges as well, but just be careful. You know, there's a lot of structure around. These do get hung up on the bottom when you're fishing that way. That's why we do them with this particular head, because we find it's a little bit easier to get unstuck if you do snag bottom. And for all of these, my preferred knot is a Perfection loop knot. Gives everything a little bit more action, gives it a nice swing, and it's an easy knot to tie. So we have a few videos on our social media about tying a Perfection loop knot. There's also a lot of good videos here on YouTube. Check it out, learn how to tie that knot. It's very effective when fishing jigs. But yeah, this is definitely my favorite way to fish the skimmer jig. And bucktail in general, although there's a lot of ways to fish it and fish it effectively. This just happens to be my personal favorite. So try it out next time you got the bucktail and you're heading to your favorite inlet or bridge. Moving down the line here, we've got our redfish jig. Again, our same troll right style head. And on this redfish jig, you'll see we use, it's half nylon and half this red synthetic flash. And the redfish jig is called the redfish jig. Not just because it catches redfish, it's actually made to look like a baby redfish. It's made to look like a baby redfish, living in the grass flats, living amongst the mangroves, holding tight to the bottom. That's what this is meant to resemble. What's really cool about this jig is it works fantastically well in clean and dirty water. The high contrast of these colors makes it extremely visible in both water types. Here I have it rigged with a DOA paddle tail, and I've caught a lot of trout with a 1/4 ounce redfish jig and a little paddle tail. What's nice about putting a paddle tail on this jig is most of the time people are fishing with some soft plastics and artificials, they're just using it on a typical jig head. And we did a video about that last week, and it's a very effective way for targeting a lot of different types of fish. But when you put it on something like this redfish jig or a skimmer jig or even a shrimp jig, now you're giving this jig, this paddle tail, a completely different look. You're beefing up the profile, and you're presenting something that the fish probably haven't seen before, or at least that day, right? Because you're giving them something that's slightly different than what the average guy is using. And I find that sometimes that's what you need to do to have the upper hand. You just want to be a little bit different. You don't have to be too different. You don't have to go off the deep end crazy, right? But something a little bit different that the fish haven't seen before, but presenting something that you still know works very effectively, like this paddle tail. And so I've used this down in the Keys very effectively for redfish and snook around mangroves, and I've caught a lot of trout with this in the Indian River using this method. My personal favorite is the white paddle tail on the back of this, but I also like they have a copper red one that goes really well with this red color. Again, you can bounce this off the bottom, do a straight retrieve. When I'm using the paddle tail, straight retrieve is my go-to. And really keying in with this jig, I found it's very effective when you're in tannin waters, like something with a slight brownish tint, but it still has clarity to it, if that makes sense. So it's still visible, but it has that brown tint to it. In that water, this jig really shines. I find that fish are keying in on particular things, depending on the watercolor, moon phase, tide, all those types of things. And when I have found that the watercolor is like what I just said, is when I find fish are really keying in on this color and this type of jig. But again, they're always very effective. And if you're in an area where there's a good population of redfish, this jig is effective because there's baby redfish in that area that larger predatory fish are eating and keying in on. That's what this is meant to mimic. So again, GulfstreamLuresUSA.com, check them out. These are available from 1/8 to 3/4 ounce. I have a 3/4 here in my hand. This is the 1/8 ounce. We make it with a white head and a gold head. And the gold head is definitely the better seller, and it's the one I typically grab. So if you're new to this, check out the gold head. Very, very effective way to jig fish. Last, but definitely not least, and probably my favorite inshore jig that we make is our flats jig. Here we have our pink flats jig in the 1/4 ounce. We have a 2X black nickel hook on these jigs, and then we also make it in a 1/8 ounce size. So this is really made very skinny water, but this can catch very big fish in very skinny water. Now, this jig was originally a jig that came out of the Keys in the 80s, and we started manufacturing this jig in the 90s. And what it was designed for was fishing the flats for bonefish and permit, and that's where it really excels. Fishing the flats, bonefish and permit, fishing slow, especially. This jig fishes slow very, very well. Not that you can't fish it fast. I have several different techniques and methods for fishing this jig, which I'll get into. But fishing it slow, just a sink and a bounce or a double bounce retrieve is all you need most of the time when fishing this jig. Especially if you're looking for bonefish and permit on the flats. They are nose down in the sand looking for crustaceans. And that's what this is meant to mimic. Same thing if you're up on a school of tailing redfish. It doesn't matter if you're in the Mosquito Lagoon or in Louisiana. They've got their nose down, they're in the sand, and they're looking for prey. This is a slow sinking jig head. That triangle shape gives it a little bit slower flutter as it comes down through the water column. Also, the combination of the bucktail with the flash offsets the weight of this head a little bit, so it falls less head heavy than most and a little bit flatter, if that makes sense. When I want to fish this jig faster, one thing I'll do is I will let it sink to the middle of the water column and give it 2 twitches. So sink a couple feet, twitch, twitch, couple feet, twitch, twitch, and you'll keep it right there in the middle of the water column. And what you're going to see is this jig, when you twitch it, has somewhat of a darting action left and right, which makes it very appealing to fish that are maybe a little stubborn, and you need to get them to just give you that reaction bite, right? You're looking for, it's like a dog chasing a ball type of situation, and you just need that fish to turn on your bait. Maybe they're being a little finicky that day. This can give you a little bit of a more erratic motion through the water because of the shape of the head, the balance of the bucktail, and you get that left-right darting action through the water. A lot of times you're gonna get that reaction bite. Usually, I'm not putting anything on this. I'm gonna fish it naked, I'm gonna fish it as is, and it's very effective. I've sight cast 40-inch snook in the surf in crystal clear water using the all white and the white and red. Those are some of my favorite colors when fishing the beach, especially here in the summertime, and I've sight cast a lot of snook using this. I've also caught tarpon on the flats using this. Now, if you are on the flats and you're specifically targeting permit and bonefish and they're being finicky, in that situation, put a little tip of shrimp on there, or maybe a little gulp shrimp tail, something with scent, because they do key in on that sometimes. And if you cast up current of the fish and let that scent drift down the current towards them, let them come to you. Sometimes if you're overly aggressive, that's when we scare fish away, okay? Casting directly on top of fish or at fish, if those fish are willing to play and hungry and ready to eat, that can be a great method. But that can also spook fish. And that's where we want to utilize scent a little bit more, and that's the only time really I'm going to tip this with anything. If the fish are being spooky, they're not really cooperating, maybe you have a little bit of chop on the surface, some wind that you're dealing with, and it's hard to see them and you need them to come to you, that's another situation where tipping it with a little bit of scent is going to be helpful. But this is one of my favorite jigs to use for a lot of different species: trout, redfish, snook, permit, pompano, tarpon, bonefish. If you're in the Keys, if you're in the Mosquito Lagoon, if you're on the West Coast and you're fishing grass flats, give this thing a try. It's very effective for many, many different species. Figure out the color that's going to work for your watercolor, your area that particular day. We do this in 1/8 and 1/4 ounce. Again, this is the 1/4 ounce. This is more often than not what I'm fishing, but if you're fishing some very skinny water, which we know, sometimes that's what we're dealing with, is some really skinny stuff. This 1/8 ounce is a very, very, very effective way to put your lure in front of the fish. It's light enough where it just has a very slow fall rate, and if you're fishing a couple feet of water or less, the 1/4 ounce is really overkill. That's where this 1/8 ounce is going to come in. It's almost like fishing a fly. Dumb down your tackle, grab that 2500, 3000 size reel, your medium light to light 7-foot spinning rod, and go have fun. These things can be a lot of fun, and with the right tackle, you can still cast it a mile. All right, guys, that is our overview of some of our inshore jigs, some of our favorite inshore jigs that we make here at Gulfstream Lures. We've been tying jigs since 1985. My name's Corey. I am one of the owners here along with my brother. We're a small family-run business. We have a few different brands that we manufacture. And we just like sharing the products that we make with you guys, sharing it with the world. This used to be my grandfather's, and we took it over about 10 years ago. We're very passionate about what we do. Fishing tackle is in our blood, it's in our DNA, it's what we love doing and sharing with the world. If you guys have any tips, techniques, ideas, tricks, tactics, anything I didn't mention, share it in the comments. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'd love to learn something new today. And if there's something I didn't mention and that you can add to the conversation, something of value, that would be fantastic. Feel free to do so. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about our products, or just want to talk and say hey, shoot us a message, shoot us a DM. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We post a lot of things there. Follow us here on YouTube, because we're going to try to keep posting more videos and be a little bit consistent with it. And if you guys are liking these videos, give us a thumbs up and we'll keep making them for you. That's definitely the goal here. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Appreciate you watching. And tune in next time. We'll have another video for you guys next week. Thanks. Tight lines.